A former president's comments draw concern even from within his own party.
女性能力比较不足，或者是说觉得你不够专业。
Taiwan's women candidates speak up about the challenges they face seeking office. Plus, we take a deep look at ruling party candidate Lai Ching-te and his vision for Taiwan's future. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Betty Chen. Former President Ma Ying-jeou says unification with China would be acceptable under certain conditions and called on Taiwan to trust China's leader Xi Jinping. John Van Tres looks at why these remarks are proving controversial with an election just days away.
With just 2 days to go until Taiwan elects its next leader, a former president is getting all the attention. Ma Ying-jeou's given an interview with Germany's DW News on Taiwan's strained ties with China, and it's proving divisive at a sensitive time. Ma has long supported improving relations with China, a country that rejects Taiwan's self-rule. His time as president saw a big easing of tensions between the countries, but his views on China were not popular and helped sink his approval into the single digits. And there are signs Ma's decision to speak his mind again now, just ahead of an election, is making his own party uneasy.
Unification is something that our constitution says. So it's actually acceptable to Taiwan, but it has to be done peacefully and through a democratic process. If that can be done, the chances are the people in Taiwan may be interested in accepting that.
First, Ma told DW that Taiwan should trust Chinese President Xi Jinping. But last year, Taiwan's top research institute found only 9% of Taiwan's people think China's trustworthy. And then there's Ma's comment on eventual unification. Ma says it could take years, but a poll last year by National Zhengzhi University found only 12% wanted to happen ever. Ma's party, the Kuomintang, is distancing itself from these remarks, even though warmer ties with China is a party goal. Kuomintang candidate Hou Yu-ih says his China policy would look different.
马前总统这一番想法跟我们有些不一样。我从以前到现在都是主张3D 战略，一就是遏制，二遏制就是要加强国防军备，提升自我保卫能力。二就是对话，三就是交流，尤其。 我对大陆的意图从来没有存在不切实际的想法。
Hou's running mate is also distancing himself from Ma's views.
马英九是前总统嘛，那就是都已经是10几年以前的事情了哈，所以马英九的讲法也不代表侯友宜的讲法。互信是很重要的了哈，如果你都不信任，那你还谈什么呢哈？但这个信任也不是无条件的信任了。
And while there's little time left to sway voters, the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, Taiwan's more China-wary party, is taking advantage of Ma's interview. At a campaign stop Wednesday, its candidate, Lai Ching-te, asked the crowd who they trust more, Xi Jinping or themselves. And he hit out at China more generally.
如果让中国介入成功，台湾的民主就荡然无存。同时呢，我们未来选的就不再是总统。
While candidates in this election have focused on other issues, from housing to raising Taiwan's birth rate, in Taiwanese politics, China is never far away, and Ma's interview has brought it back to the surface. John Su and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
For a closer look at Ma's interview and its possible impact, John Van Trieste spoke to political analyst Courtney Donovan-Smith.
First of all, what do you read into Ma Ying-jeou's intentions in speaking so frankly about a subject in which his views are quite different from the general voter so soon before an election?
Well, I think a lot of what Ma does is two different things. One is his legacy. He feels that's very important. He also wants to remain relevant in the conversation, and he represents a certain wing of the party, and he wants to make sure that his opinions and his way of thinking and that wing of the party.
But we've seen his Kuomintang, his party, at least the candidates for them, distance themselves from his comments and his views. Could that indicate that they're worried about alienating voters?
When they try to distance themselves from it, it's because they know that it sounds bad to independent voters or those sort of more in the center who have less of a unificationist stance or don't have a unificationist stance at all and are opposed to it. So they want to make sure that they still have some appeal to the broad center of Taiwan politics.
Do you think that Ma may have hurt his party's chances? Are his comments going to have any impact on the election?
One is it helps move some of the undecideds or independents who are concerned about Taiwan's sovereignty away from or towards Lai. But I think the second most important impact that this will have is that the Lai campaign's two biggest challenges are not the other candidates, but apathy and complacency. So I think that, this helps juice up the base a little bit more and may help boost voter turnout on the DPP side.
Once again, that was political analyst Courtney Donovan-Smith speaking to our reporter John Van Tres about former President Ma Ying-jeou. The main opposition party ticket has pledged a new kind of leadership, different from its traditional pro-China roots. The Kuomintang is trying to win back the presidency by recognizing that more of the same will not do. Joyce Zeng reports.
The main opposition contenders for Taiwan's top office have come out in full force in the final days leading up to an election that may well shift of already tense U.S. and China relations and also regional order. The KMT's presidential candidate Hou Yu-ih and vice presidential candidate Keqiang were largely questioned on China and their approach to Beijing's rejection of Taiwanese sovereignty. The two have had to mostly answer for the KMT's long history of being more pro-China, but Hou here has recognized that we're facing a different China. It's a different time. And so his priority is actually to strengthen Taiwan's national defense and to deter Beijing from using force. Now, Hou has also pledged that he's putting forward a new and more current KMT to serve the wishes of the Taiwanese people to maintain the status quo of political autonomy and peace.
其实我们两个是跟以前的传统的国民党可能有一点点大家不一样，很多的想法。所以我回头过来我们再讲嘛，时空环境不一样，我们两位从来对中共的意图我们从来没有不切实际的一个想法。
沟通交流是很重要的，我们的民主制度也是最重要的。当然，国防很重要，要准备。但是你光靠国防，说实话，你只是给他一个严重的打击。
Now, Hou's also claimed that under the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, Taiwan has actually moved further away from the status quo and towards the risk of war. And that's why Hou says another priority is reopening good dialogue with Beijing. And he says that this is the best way to secure the status quo and maintain peace across the strait. And he's also saying that he, Keqiang, and the KMT are the best ones positioned to achieve that. Chris Ma and Joyce Zhen in New Taipei City for TaiwanPlus.
As part of our election coverage here on TaiwanPlus, we're taking a closer look at each of the three presidential candidates, who they are and what they stand for. We are airing the three profiles across 3 days in the order they will appear on a ballot. So on day 2, we look at Lai Ching-te from the ruling Democratic Progressive Party.
Taiwan's first female president, Tsai Ing-wen, will soon leave office after serving the maximum 2 terms. One of the people hoping to take her place is her right-hand man, current Vice President Lai Ching-te. But they weren't always on the same side. In the last election, Lai challenged incumbent Tsai to be their party's choice for the top seat. Lai lost that bid, but became her running mate instead. So who is this man now hoping to take over the highest office in Taiwan? This is Lai Ching-te explained.
您在当行政院长的时候说过，您是务实的台独主义者。那我想要请问，
台独工作者。
哦，是。
A worker for Taiwan independence. That's how Lai Ching-te once described himself. Lai began his working career as a doctor, only turning to politics at age 35. He started off as a volunteer for the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, organizing rallies. But not long after, he switched to politics full-time and hasn't looked back since.
2024年
显而易见的，也不是战争与和平的选择，而是民主与专制的抉择。
Lai was a vocal advocate for formal Taiwanese independence from China right from the start of his political career. China claims Taiwan as part of its territory to be taken by force if necessary. Lai's views have seen Beijing label him as a separatist and troublemaker. But Lai's stance on Taiwan independence has changed with time, as his political career took off, rising to the rank of premier, the head of the country's cabinet, and then vice president, and now presidential hopeful.
Lai knew that to get the presidency, he does have to be much more moderate on cross-strait relations.
That change didn't come easily. Back in 2020, some in the DPP who wanted to push harder for Taiwan independence wanted someone with a stronger approach than President Tsai Ing-wen. You may think Tsai is pro-Taiwanese independence, which is true. Tsai does advocate that Taiwan is already independent from Beijing, but as the Republic of China, which is Taiwan's official name. That puts her at odds with some in her party that would prefer Taiwan rewrote its constitution and changed its official name to something like the Republic of Taiwan. That's why party seniors turned to Lai. He ran against the incumbent Tsai in the party primary after her first term. But he lost that bid, largely by failing to get the support of young voters.
The progressive young people that really backed Tsai after the 2014 Sunflower Movement and were a major catalyst in her election.
But in the end, Tsai decided to call on Lai to serve as her VP instead and help reunite the DPP. Though Lai's primary challenge may have ruffled some feathers, after becoming vice president, he has followed Tsai's mild-mannered approach. Now that Lai is seeking the presidency again, his past comments on Taiwan-China ties have resurfaced as a talking point. Some are hoping that his support for a new independent Taiwan state can make a comeback, formally drawing a line between the two sides. Meanwhile, some others fear a Lai presidency would lead to a further deterioration in relations with China. So far, Lai has shown little sign of deviating from Tsai's legacy, and people will be closely watching whether that strategy will be enough to persuade Taiwanese voters he's the man for the top job.
You can find the profiles of the TPP and KMT presidential candidates on our website, TaiwanPlus.com, along with more in-depth analysis of all three parties. Be sure to catch the last candidate profile aired in tomorrow's show. This year is set to see a record number of women running to become lawmakers in Taiwan. The country already has one of Asia's most balanced gender ratios in politics, but challenges remain. Our reporter Ed Moon caught up with 3 young women running for office to find out more about life on the campaign trail.
Radio personality Irina Lee is putting in the miles for what Taiwan calls the land battle, the hard graft needed to win over voters before polling day. Lee is representing Taiwan's main opposition Kuomintang, or KMT, a Chinese nationalist party with strong support among older generations. But at 30 years old, Lee is the youngest legislative candidate in the country, and she's hoping to appeal to other young people who are wary of Beijing's claim over self-ruled Taiwan.
大家看到我的时候是很支持我，是先认识李明玄，先喜欢李明玄，愿意支持李明玄，然后发现到说哦，他是国民党提名的哦，哎，那感觉国民党不一样哦。
Just 2 months older than Lee, Huang Jie of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party is now also running for a seat in a legislature, competing in national politics for the first time. Unlike the KMT, support among young voters is strong for her party, which advocates Taiwan's independence from China. But Huang says campaigning as a woman comes with its own set of challenges.
女性能力比较不足，或者是说觉得你不够专业，甚至是会有一些针对外表上，然后我的言行举止上的批评，然后还有羞辱都蛮多的，甚至是比较严重的是一些性羞辱。
Jennifer Hou Yu-ih of the smaller Taiwan People's Party doesn't have the resources of the DPP and KMT, But Li says her party has a better record on women's representation than its two bigger rivals. That's despite criticism of her party's leader, presidential candidate Keqiang, for sexist comments.
Within the TPP, we have just more female politicians or political workers within our party, and even more than KMT and DPP. So I think he considered everyone based on their ability, their capability, rather than their just gender.
With just days to go before the election, all three candidates are still canvassing for every vote. Taiwan already has one of the highest rates of female participation in politics in Asia. Over 40% of lawmakers are women, and this year there are more female candidates than ever before. It's a chance for the major parties to try some fresh blood in politics, but it'll be up to the voters to decide whether it's time for change. John Su, Scott Huang, Peachy Zhuang and Ed Moon in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
As Taiwan prepares to elect its next leader, accusations of misogyny are growing louder. Harrell Hughes reports.
Tears, confusion, and exasperation. These women are reacting to remarks made by two of Taiwan's presidential candidates. Remarks about women. This is a campaign video released by Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party. It shows the opposition Kuomintang's candidate Hou Yu-ih and Taiwan People's Party's Keqiang and their comments on women. For these women, Hou's remarks and old clips of Ke suggesting that women should stay at home are a painful sign that the potential next president might not have their interests in mind. And it's something the DPP is trying to use to their advantage.
But I think what the DPP should do is to reach out to young women voters who wouldn't vote for KMT, but they wouldn't necessarily vote for the TPP because of the chauvinistic views that Ke holds.
The UN has ranked Taiwan first in Asia and 7th in the world for gender equality. But since Taiwan's Me Too movement got going in earnest last year, more women have been speaking out against sexism and misogyny in politics. It's now a topic that's become central to the presidential race. The loudest accusations have been directed at Ke, who has a large following among Taiwan's young people.
The TPP looks really good on paper. They have decent policies. They're trying to make a good change in the world. That's great. But when you look at what Keqiang actually says on the record at these rallies and things, you will very quickly notice that there is a divergence between what is on paper and how he is as a person.
And while the DPP uses the opposition candidate's past record to position itself as the more progressive choice, women's rights groups say none of the candidates are doing enough to promote gender equality.
民进党的部分当然有一些，例如说弹性育婴假的改革这样的一个承诺，但是大部分的诉求其实是比较偏模糊的带过。国民党跟民众党的回复，其实大部分的题目是比较没有去，就是说关注到真正性别平等价值的推进。
They're calling for clear policy proposals that show the candidates care about gender issues.
Taiwan's elections are just days away, and with accusations of misogyny and questions over whether women are truly valued, women here will have a difficult choice in deciding who will be the next best leader for them. Klein Wang and Harrell Hughes for TaiwanPlus.
As candidates make their final bids for the presidency, our reporter Rick Glauert is at a rally in central Taipei for ruling party candidate Lai Ching-te. Rick, tell us what's happening there and what's at stake.
So here, not far from the presidential office in the capital, Taipei, the presidential candidate for the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, he's called Lai Ching-te, is holding one of his last big rallies before Saturday's important vote. Now, hundreds of people are filing in here and they're all keen to hear from Lai and his running mate, Bi Kim-hsiao. They're expected to speak within the next hour or two. Now, Lai has very much positioned himself as a safe pair of hands. He's the current VP, and he says he can take over the work done by the current president, Tsai Ing-wen. On China, he says he knows how to manage those all-important, delicate relations with Beijing. He says he takes Taiwan's defense seriously, but has also left the door open for conversations with Beijing. On domestic issues, Lai says he's listened to the people and that he will do something about the stagnating wages here and the high house prices that a lot of young people are complaining about. Throughout this weekend, the other presidential candidates will be holding big events like this, all of them making that final push to secure votes ahead of the elections on Saturday. Back to you, Betty.
That was Rick Glowert reporting live from the Democratic Progressive Party's final campaign rally in Taipei. When people head to the polls on Saturday, over 400,000 of them will be casting a ballot for indigenous seats. There are 6 seats reserved in the legislature for indigenous Taiwanese from 2 nationwide districts known as the Low Plains and the High Mountains. 73 seats are elected from specific districts, which indigenous candidates cannot run for. But there are 34 party list seats which are filled through a proportional system based on voter support. Indigenous candidates can also get a seat this way. To learn more about indigenous voters in Taiwan, our reporter Tiffany Wong spoke with Dr. Jolan Xie, director of the Center of International Indigenous Affairs at National Donghua University.
So historically, indigenous voters have supported the Kuomintang or KMT. Why is that, and do you see that changing this election cycle?
So I have to say that for indigenous voters, it divided into it's different age category. They will do the different things. So for example, for the older generation, they don't really look at the policies to have their voting behaviors. So they are pretty much go with the party they always been faithful. So for example, like for the KMT, they probably got the majority vote of indigenous group populations. But for younger generation, they're more like to look at the policies.
You mentioned that younger voters are considering different issues each time they vote. So what are those issues this time around?
For middle age or younger generation, they really do care about the opportunities for language revitalizations and then cultural rights. More than 50% of indigenous people live in the urban area in the city, so they needed to have job opportunities, but at the same time, those issues are more like a concern about, by our younger generations. And then the third thing is like the job opportunities and more diverse, because in the past, our indigenous people is more like in low-end military job and police or in service industrial. But indigenous people were crying or the clan and demanding more opportunities in art industrial and culture industrial. And then, like I said, to performing talent and with international connections. So that is a different thing that is indigenous youth are more focused on.
For the legislative seats, people registered with indigenous identity in Taiwan are allowed to vote for an indigenous legislator. And these seats are divided between High Mountains indigenous and Low Plains indigenous. Do you think this really represents indigenous people and indigenous voters in Taiwan?
I also call that as kind of a segregation policies. So if you are indigenous, you can only vote the indigenous candidates, or you want to run for indigenous candidate, you must to have registered status. So for example, if you want to be like in general role, in general election district, you have to give up your indigenous status. So that is like you do not have your power or your right as Taiwanese citizens. Most people also understand that it's false dichotomies and false category, because that doesn't really represent where you come from or your tribal community or your indigenous nations. So for example, if you are Amis, and then Amis can be like being categorized in high mountain indigenous and low plain indigenous. So that is totally wrong.
That was our reporter Tiffany Wong speaking to Dr. Jolan Xie about indigenous voters in Taiwan. Police and members of Taiwan's armed forces are helping some of the country's most remote places cast their ballot in Saturday's elections. Jaime Okan reports.
Police officers and volunteers in southeastern Taiwan are preparing the country to go to the polls. On January 13th, millions of people here will elect the country's next leader. And while casting a vote in big cities like Taipei and Kaohsiung might not be difficult, For smaller, less developed areas like Taidong or Orchid Island, it can be a little harder. That's why local officials are working with the military to make sure ballots and polling stations are ready before Election Day.
目前还在联系相关单位，包括海巡或者是我们空军的部分来做协助。
Volunteers are also making sure that counting and transferring the ballots on the big day will be just as smooth. Officials are hoping to install vote counting machines which count ballots with speed and accuracy.
印刷厂印的都很精准的啦，所以他们就是100张隔一个，他们就点那个大叠这样几叠，然后对报告表对准了以后，然后零数的部分再轻点一下这样子。
Saturday's elections are set to be one of the most pivotal in the country's history, with issues like security, the cost of living, and housing all at the forefront. And the influx of volunteers here shows just how people are doing their part to make sure everyone gets their voice heard. Isan Pan and Hameokan for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Before we sign off, check out these AI-powered robots and tech innovations on display at CES 2024 in Las Vegas. I'm Betty Chen. Take care and see you next time.